everyone, and welcome again to another edition of the Philly Factor. I'm your host, Paul Perrello. Joining me on this edition of the program is an author who in reading about her, she really has done it all. Now, the only thing I did not see, Andrea, in your resume was dancing, although perhaps dancing was also in there. But in just
no. Two left feet, never a triple threat, only a double threat.
Okay, because you write, you sing, you act, you enjoy painting, drawing, spending time at the beach, and then you managed to write this wonderful book that we're going to talk about here, Boss and Hunky, The Adventures of an Out-of-Work Gargoyle. So I want to welcome Andrea Mower to our program. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
This is a wonderful children's book. On the surface, it's a wonderful children's book, but there are so many lessons in this book, Andrea, that it really could apply to adults. And I know this sort of fits in, Andrea, with your work in the area of human resources,
yes,
correct?
It does, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about the genesis of Boss and Hunky, how this story came about, how this work came about, given your expertise in so many areas, especially in the world of HR, how this book came about.
Well, the idea for the book came about when my husband and I were sitting on the beach in Brigantine, New Jersey, and we were looking up at a very old building. It used to be the Brigantine Inn. It was built in 1928, very Art Deco, now part of Legacy Resorts. And the building has been there through everything. And I just looked up at the top of it and I said to my husband, Tim, what happens if a building is torn down and a gargoyle is suddenly out of work? What do they do? And he said, well, why don't you write about it? So I said, okay. So I actually started writing Boss and Hunky as a play, a children's play, and the dialogue in chapter 2 could absolutely be adapted to a play. But then I thought more about it, and I thought, I'll write a book. I'll write a children's book, but for children of an older age, not a picture book. And then my husband said, you have so much experience in human resources and in employee relations. He said, why not do a crossover appeal where an adult can buy it for their child, but then they can use it themselves? So that's how it really came about. And I think, if you put eyes and a mouth on almost anything, it comes to life for me. When I was a little girl, my mom and I were driving past a Christmas tree lot on Christmas Eve. I was about 9 years old. And I said to my mom, oh, it's a shame those trees that are left over died in vain. And she just thought that was the most unusual statement for a 9-year-old to say, that the trees died in vain because they all should have had a home. And so I just, have always been interested in inanimate objects coming to life, and gargoyles and trolls and all different kinds of things. I guess I was a weird kid.
Not at all. No, just a kid with a vision and insight into things that are on buildings. Not at all. And I think you sort of answered the whole idea of why a gargoyle, because gargoyles aren't necessarily something that we see a lot of today. Of course, right. You could go to Europe and you can tour many of the the churches and the castles there, and you'll see these iconic figures gracing the precipice, the tops and corners of of all these churches and buildings. But we don't see many. Although I think if you look hard enough around town, you might catch something that appears similar to a gargoyle. I mean, in some of the older buildings, right?
Yes. And for some reason, in my book, there's a lot of subtext, and I think it's because of my training at the University of the Arts a long time ago in theater. There's a lot of subtext. So even with their names, Boss, her name, well, because, girl boss and a strong female role model, but also in architecture, a boss is at the top of a ceiling. It's like a little round cap. And sometimes women hit that ceiling in their careers. So boss has a double name for me. And Hunky Punk, without revealing too much in the book, he's not exactly a gargoyle. So people don't know that much about gargoyles either. And I kind of reversed the roles because the boy is Hunky Punk and the girl is Boss. And Hunky Punk has a role where he's pretty much just looked at. That is what he does for a living. So I was trying to have a lot of subtext for people to maybe they pick it up and maybe they don't.
And much of what you just outlined there applies to the workplace on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
In this evolving environment in terms of workplaces today. I mean, aside from the pandemic where many people have been forced to work from home, but in the traditional setting of an office, we see tremendous problems and challenges with that balance in the workplace not necessarily being equal, in that many people would still argue that it is still a predominantly white male world and that there aren't too many females moving up, although there are many that are starting to move up and approach that ceiling and even shatter that ceiling. So I guess your background in human resources plays a lot into these characters and some of the challenges that they face today, and you've done it in a way where it's not preachy or over preachy in trying to drive home your point.
Yes. The character of Walter would definitely represent the white male today, and Don represents a non-traditional person, or I guess bird, who's raising his family. And Morton really represents all the worker bees, all the people who just come in every day and do their job.
So when you came up with this idea while you were sitting on the beach at Brigantine, you came up with this idea for this book. How long, Andrea, did it actually take you from the concept of coming up with this idea to the finished product now that is available in bookstores and on Amazon?
Almost 5 years.
Wow. Yeah.
It took that long. I would start writing and then I would put aside, and I started writing and I had to find an illustrator, and that took quite a long time until I reached out to my alumni network at the University of the Arts and found a graduate, Robert Bond, who is an animator, and he took on the project. And I didn't know what I was doing and he didn't know what he was doing, but he perfectly captured what was my vision. And then I did everything I was supposed to do. I wrote it, and then I did what many writers do. I stuck it in a drawer. I took it back out and brushed it off, and here we are.
And therein also lies a lesson in that, you really do have to put a lot of time and effort into a project like this, but not to be discouraged. I mean, oftentimes people come up with an idea and never act on that idea. They just say, "Oh, I have an idea for a book," or "This is what I want to do," and they never do it. Or they write the book, they put it in the drawer, and then many years later they take the manuscript and toss it out, figuring that idea came and went. But your I guess the lesson that not only in the book but the lesson personally that you're sharing with us is that good hard work, time and effort, and it'll eventually pay off. And it may have taken 5 years, and probably from your standpoint, it seemed like more than 5 years because of all the effort. And this really became a passion project for you. But in the end, when you go and you look at what you have here, it just resonates on so many different levels. And I think that's what's so good with this book is that, yes, people may think it's a children's book. People, like you said earlier in the interview, may pick up the book as a gift or for a child at home. But then they may actually see the value of using this by bringing it into the workplace and maybe using it at an office meeting or an office seminar or a gathering where the lessons of these characters in Boss and Hunky can really apply to the workplace.
I would use it in my own training and teaching as a leader in human resources. One of the best things my editor did was to suggest that the chapter questions go after each chapter. because in a typical book, you have to keep flipping to the very back of the book. And we decided to put into each chapter and use it as a workbook. So you're not going to get through all chapters in one session. I have an acquaintance of mine who every night before she, her husband, and her 14-year-old son retire, they tackle one chapter and do the questions. You could do a couple chapters at a time. And it's also not an intimidating business book full of a lot of business jargon. It's almost a parable book.
How well, I mean, it's one thing for the book to be received on the level of being a children's book, but given your background in HR and from the business world, how has the book been received amongst your colleagues in the business world, in the arena of HR? I mean, some people might pick it up and say, well, this is a children's book. And then somebody, if they have an ounce of a brain cell, will turn around and say, this is something that we could use on a daily basis in our work environment. So how has it been received from the business world?
Therapist, which I find to be a great compliment because I really admire what therapists do. I really enjoy employee relations in my profession. Love walking that fine line, advocating for the employee and advocating for management and bringing people together, fighting for causes at work. I created a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, a staff committee at my place of employment. And I really enjoy that type of stuff. So I think that can be used, the book can be used for those sensitive issues as well. I mean, boss has a flaw. Boss has what could be called in the workplace a physical disability, and how is that handled? So there's all little nuggets in there, and when it comes to the personalities of the statuaries in the garden, that's very similar to different personality and work assessment profiles that people take. There's your argumentative person, there's your schmoozer, there's your person who hides from everything, the person who avoids everything. So you can kind of talk about that and how you can get along better with people in the workplace.
Was there a concern on your part? I mean, and I suspect that when you sat down to write this, was it your goal to just write a children's book? Was it your goal to write a children's book and an HR book? Or I guess where I'm going with this is that you're dealing with some everyday challenges in the workplace that kids may not necessarily be exposed to, but adults are definitely exposed to. So was that your intent to write just a children's book, or a children's book that would also could be used as an HR lesson plan or a lesson book?
I really just intended to write a children's book for young audiences, but I think it was my experiences that came out in the book. And when I was writing a book, I would do a little teaser on my LinkedIn page and say, well, everyone's always asked me to write a book about my experiences in HR. Here it comes. Are you in the book? Which nobody is in the book. It's all fictional. But something in me came out in the book, and it just came out naturally. And that's why my husband said, you're missing a whole audience here. And then I created the chapter questions.
And then writing this book, then, and you said that there many of your experiences are in the book, but like every book, I think every work of fiction has the disclaimer in the beginning of the book that the characters in this book do not represent people in real life, and that the times and the places aren't necessarily based on.
I guess I should have put that.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, you have treated these subjects and you've treated these characters with such finesse and with such dignity that I don't think we really have to worry about experiencing what these characters are going through, fearing that we're going to insult or you're going to insult people, regardless of the workplace, that someone's going to say, Yeah, that's, I know who she's talking about. Or
Yeah, no, because they're all a combination of many people. It was funny when the book first came out, a friend of mine emailed me. She's a retired teacher, and she said, Frank, who's her husband, Frank wants to know if Walter is him. And it was only because of the glasses and his hairline and everything, maybe a physical resemblance. I said, absolutely not. Your husband is not Walter. And she said, oh, darn, he was hoping he was. I said, no, he's not. He's not. But they're a combination of, you know, people, beings, I guess. They're not really people except Walter and Morton. But just different experiences I've had. They're a combination of personalities and experiences.
Did you find it easier then to write for these characters in the book, using them as perhaps inanimate objects, like, statuary or whatever? Was it easier to um, present the scenarios that you've presented in the book using items as opposed to real characters, real people in the book?
Yes, it was easier to write about inanimate objects, because if I wrote about people, I probably would have been more specific and had someone in mind to guide me through the writing process. But I think because of my theater background, I characters, and then I kind of breathe the life into the characters and the different personalities.
You mentioned earlier in the interview about giving when you started this project, you thought about using it or creating a play for these characters. So, given the success of the book, and given the fact that this book is out there and it's been received the way that it has, it's not uncommon today for projects that start out in one form turn into something else down the line. So I guess the question is, might you try to adapt this as a stage play, perhaps, or maybe even get, you said that the animator that worked on the book might even turn this into like a short animated film.
Oh, I would absolutely love if Robert wanted to do that. I've already contacted Robert to work on our second Boston Hunky book. I think this could be a play or a musical. Also, see at some point maybe package the book with a Boston Hunky figurine. I know a lot of children's authors do that with a plush character, but because it's for an older audience, I think of more of like a composite or a polyresin type of a figurine. I'm very visual that way. Like if it was me buying it, I would want a toy with it. So I think I can go in a lot of directions. I'm really open to anything. One of the things I really want to do is get in front of an audience of HR and other business professionals and teach them how to use the book in a business setting, as well as do a little personality, some games with personalities, and seeing, who they might have issue working with in the workplace. Is it the gnome, the fairy, the angel, the turtle? Who is your biggest, employee relations problem or coworker problem, and how we can work through those issues? So I'm really open to anything. It took 5 years to get to here. So whatever happens, I would be really, really happy about it, as long as people can learn something and they enjoy it.
You sort of answered my follow-up question.
Oh, sorry.
which would have been, is there going to be another book? And you've already...
There is. I have 4 chapters written. Again, it's slow. It's like at the end of a work day and the end of a long week, it's hard to get in front of the computer. But Boston Hunky and the gang have a lot more lessons to teach. The next one is about being taken for granted. There's a new character who has a function in the home that is taken for granted, and they're going to work through that issue because, in the workplace, you have a lot of personalities, and there's always those people who are slow and steady and reliable, and maybe they don't even want a lot of attention or a lot of accolades, but that still doesn't mean that they don't want to be recognized for what they do. And when your employees go silent, that's when you have to worry. when they're no longer saying anything at all. Oh, I have nothing to contribute. Yeah, that sounds okay with me. And then after the second book, I have an idea for the third book where Boss and Hunky have a lot of trouble with that fairy who comes back to find Boss. And, sometimes in the workplace, it's such a small world. You don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to have bad relationships with people, because sometimes people work together more than once, or in school class together more than once. So each book is going to have a little lesson for all of us.
The fact that it took 5 years for the first book, chances are lessons learned in this process may expedite the matter for books.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
I have the team in place now. Now I know how to do it. I, have a great publicist and editor and mentor in Lorraine Rinaldi, who I said to her, please get me to the next step with this. And I have Robert and a lot of friends and family who are very, very supportive, and they're already asking for it. They're saying, okay, you did this, but what's next?
Yeah.
So
in the 2 minutes that we have left, then, Andrea, what is the takeaway from Boss and Hunky? What can we take away from this first book that we could apply to our everyday life, regardless of who we are, regardless of what our job is? What is the takeaway?
Right. Look deeper than the surface. It might sound cliche, but things aren't always as they appear. And I think in life, the definition of family is much different than it used to be. And the friends, our ally, they're the family that we choose. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be alone in the garden. You may get all the courage and gumption, but it's coming from somewhere. So you reach out to your support system. You do have your support system.
And what has this whole experience meant to you when you look back now at this? What has this meant to you personally?
I had a lot of fun with saying I was a published author. But I think that just the fact that I created something that is relatable to everyone, and that I was really surprised at some of the reactions that I had.
I want to thank you, Andrea, for being with us. The book is a wonderful read for kids as well as for adults. The name of the book is Boss and Hunky, The Adventures of an Out-of-Work Gargoyle. It's been a pleasure meeting you, speaking with you. I want to wish you continued success. All the best of luck with this book. And I look forward to books 2 and 3. Not to put pressure on you now, but I am looking forward to the other books in the series.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor. My name's Paul Perrello. Thanks for being with us.